A terrorist hijacking inspires an incredible mission.
I was very determined when we have to do this. I feel the need to be effective and to defend our people.
A young nation is forever changed.
As I lost a beloved brother, and this was a great shock and undoubtedly affected my life in fundamental ways.
With echoes of Nazi Germany.
Oh my God, they are going to have a small Holocaust in this plane.
And a daring rescue mission that stuns the world. June 27th, 1976. Air France Flight 139 from Tel Aviv to Paris with 200 passengers aboard makes a scheduled stopover in Athens. Security is lax. The metal detector is unmanned, the X-ray technician inattentive. 56 additional passengers board the plane, and it departs for Paris. But 2 minutes after takeoff, 3 men and a woman leap to their feet, brandishing guns and grenades. Flight 139 has been hijacked. Captain Michel Bacchus, a pilot for 21 years, is confronted with the first hijacking in Air France history.
A terrorist had his gun continuously pointed at my head, and occasionally he would poke my neck to remind me not to look at him. We could only obey the orders of the terrorists.
Tricia Martel was en route to London for her mother's funeral.
Anybody who tried to protest, they would hit them with the butt of the gun or with their hand. You sit, you can't breathe, everything dries up, and all you can think of is, dear God, help me.
The hijackers announced that they have commandeered the flight in the name of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, the PFLP. They plant explosives along the aisles, search passengers, and collect passports. Their destination is unknown. Ilan Hartouv was traveling with his mother, Dora Bloch.
We heard a voice with a German accent telling us the whole story that we've changed direction. I was afraid that the German woman, either because she hated us or because she was absent-minded, she would throw the hand grenade and we would all explode.
The 12-man crew and 256 passengers aboard the plane hail from a dozen nations. A babble of languages and the presence of young children adds to the chaos. But to air traffic controllers, Flight 139 falls silent. The loss of radio contact is immediately registered by the electronic ears of Israeli intelligence forces. A message is flashed to Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. Flight 139, with a large number of Israelis aboard, has either crashed or been hijacked. At Tel Aviv's Lod airport, military forces go on alert, expecting the plane to return to Israel. At the time, Muki Betzer was deputy commander of an elite Israeli commando force.
The practice and the tactic is that as soon as the plane lands on a predetermined runway, we trail it, and just as it stops, we break in through the doors and other areas that we have the means to swiftly break through using special explosives, and we free the hostages.
But rather than flying to Israel, the hijackers direct the plane south and land in Benghazi, Libya. Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi allows the plane to refuel, but will not allow it to stay. Hostage Tricia Martel pleads for a doctor and concocts the perfect ploy to be released from the plane.
He took my pulse and he said, "What's happening?" And I said to him, "I think I might be miscarrying. I'm 4 months pregnant, and if I start bleeding here, I'll die because there's no way you'll be able to stop the bleeding." So he just looked at the terrorists and he said to them, "We better get her off the plane."
Martel's clever ruse works. She is flown via Libyan Airlines to London and is debriefed there by Scotland Yard. She provides the outside world its first information on the terrorists: 2 Arab men and a German couple. The Germans are identified as Gabriel Krosch-Tiedemann and Wilfried Boos. They are terrorists for hire from the notorious Baader-Meinhof gang. Aboard Flight 139, the passengers endure 7 tense hours in the steaming cabin. When the plane finally lifts off from Libya, everyone speculates on the next destination. Will it be Damascus, Baghdad, Beirut? To everyone's surprise, they head instead to the Central African nation of Uganda.
Uganda, oye!
The terrorists are greeted at Entebbe airport by Ugandan dictator Idi Amin Dada. It is estimated that Amin may have killed over 300,000 countrymen while taking over Uganda. With 5 wives and as many as 18 children, Amin is known in the West as Big Daddy. He is also known to be suffering from advanced syphilis and prone to that disease's irrational behavior. For years, Amin had allied himself with Israel, but in 1972 the Israeli government refused to provide him with high-performance jets that he wanted to use to attack neighboring Tanzania. His pride stung, Amin severed relations with Israel and embraced the Palestinian cause. After the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, Palestinian groups resorted to terrorism to regain the land they claimed as their own. In 1972, Palestinian-sponsored terror escalated to new heights of violence. May 15th, 28 civilians gunned down at Lod Airport. May 30th, 22 children killed in a school bombing in Ma'alot, Israel. And September 5th, 11 Israeli athletes slaughtered at the Summer Olympics in Munich. At Munich, the Israeli government held on to its long-standing policy of not negotiating with terrorists. But the disastrous results of the botched hostage rescue by German security forces caused many Israelis to question their government's actions. Still haunted by the Olympic disaster, Israeli leaders dreaded a repeat at Entebbe. Midday Monday, the hijackers herd 256 passengers and 12 crew members into the airport's old terminal building. The 4 terrorists from the plane are joined by 6 other Palestinians already in Uganda. Hostage Sarah Davidson and her family were traveling to the United States as a special bar mitzvah present for her son, Benny.
The worst of all was that my children are taken away from me. You can't imagine. It's a feeling that you can't even describe. It's not fear of death, no. I had this before with other traumas in my life, and it's not a fear of death, not at all. It's a fear of the unknown, of uncertainty. You don't know what's going on in the next minute. What are they going to do to you, or much more important, to your children.
Amin makes a personal visit to the hostages, waving and shouting, "Shalom, shalom." When a young mother addresses him as Mr. President, he barks back, "I am His Excellency Field Marshal Dr. Idi Amin Dada, appointed by God Almighty to be your savior." In Israel, Prime Minister Rabin presses his generals to develop a rescue plan. But this seems highly unlikely since Uganda is 2,500 miles away. Israel had maintained a diplomatic mission there until Amin ordered it closed 4 years earlier. but there is little current information available on the Entebbe airport. But then it is discovered that an Israeli company built the terminal and can provide detailed architectural drawings.
But what was missing, and it was clear that without this information there would be no operation, was A, what was the current condition of the airport terminal, and B, where was the location where the hostages were being kept prisoner?
Prime Minister Ehud Barak is the most decorated soldier in Israeli history. In 1976, he was chief of operations for the intelligence branch of the Israeli Defense Force.
In 2 hours, we had the first slides of pictures from the old terminal in Entebbe, brought by people from our Air Force. And a few hours later, we got movies taken in this terminal during different ceremonies.
Initially, Israeli Defense Force Chief of Staff Mordechai Mota Gur does not consider a military operation a realistic option. Gur recommends that the government negotiate with the terrorists for the release of the hostages. But lower echelon officers are already thinking of ways to mount a rescue mission.
At that time, I was second in command of the Hercules Squadron. I was around 29. When it all started, we were at the squadron, listening to the news. We were playing with calculation of capabilities, with fuel, range, load, our capability of reaching there. We were assuming that if somebody have to do it, it's us.
Monday evening, Israeli intelligence identifies Dr. Wadi Haddad as the mastermind behind the hijacking of Flight 139. Haddad heads a PLO splinter group called the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. Their specialty, international terrorism. Tuesday, day 3 of the crisis. Uganda's Radio Kampala finally announces the hijackers' demands: the release of 53 terrorists held in Israel, France, Switzerland, Germany, and Kenya, and a ransom of $5 million from the French government. The deadline is 2 p.m. Thursday, just 2 days away. If the demands are not met, they will kill the hostages. The terrorists to be released include Kozo Okamoto, who planned the bloodbath at Lod Airport, and Archbishop Capucci, who used his position to smuggle guns to other terrorists in the Middle East. An hour after issuing their demands, the terrorists take an ominous step.
They broke a cupboard, a plywood wall. They arranged for a kind of door, and they called names. The minute he began to call, we began to know it was all Israelis.
Hostages are separated into 2 groups, Jews and Gentiles. The sight of Germans segregating Jews revives chilling memories of Nazi Germany. A young medical student writes in his diary, "The feeling here is like an execution."
It's a terrible feeling. It's a feeling of separation, that you are different, and that you are punished because you are a Jew. Not only Israelis, but you are a Jew, so you are punished.
During the crisis, Shimon Peres was defense minister.
I jumped to the sky the minute I heard that the Germans are dividing the passengers between Jews and non-Jews. This was the most emotional moment in my own consideration. I said, my God, you're going to have a small Holocaust in this plane.
One hostage, a concentration camp survivor, later recalled.
I felt myself back 32 years when I heard the German orders and saw the waving guns and imagined the shuffling lines of prisoners and the harsh cry, "Jews to the right." And I wondered, what good is Israel if this can happen today?
Wednesday, June 30th. At Uganda's Entebbe Airport, 256 passengers and 12 crew members from Air France Flight 139 begin their 4th day as prisoners. Palestinian terrorists have threatened to execute the hostages one by one if their demands are not met. Despite assurances by French officials that they would not negotiate a separate release of French hostages, they facilitate the release of 47 non-Israelis. Refusing to leave his passengers behind, Captain Bakos asks his crew to take a courageous stand.
I told them our duty is to stay with the passengers until the end, no matter what happens. If someone disagrees with me, just tell me. All of them agreed to stay until the end, to do our duty.
For the terrorists, releasing some of their victims is a public relations plus, but a tactical blunder. The freed hostages are immediately questioned by the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency.
And so you start to look for every piece of information, for every person who was there, who knew the situation. You just try to look for anything that you can. And Rabin said from the very beginning that he will not approve a military operation unless the intelligence is clear and unshakable.
No detail escapes the Mossad's attention.
How many terrorists there were, where they were, in what rooms the hostages were being kept, what was there, the layout of the airfield, what was in the airfield, how many Ugandan soldiers were around, and many, many other questions.
Most telling of all, the interviews confirm that Amin and his soldiers are helping the hijackers. Any rescue attempt will have to overcome not just 10 ruthless terrorists, but the Ugandan armed forces. As the hijackers' deadline approaches, emotions rise in Israel. Families of the hostages descend on Prime Minister Rabin's compound, demanding that he do the unthinkable, negotiate with terrorists.
I can understand our families in Israel. They didn't know anything, whether we live, whether we are tortured, whether we are all together or separated.
On Thursday morning, the hijackers free 101 hostages, leaving only the flight crew and 107 Jews as captives. In Israel, newspaper headlines scream a word long associated with the Holocaust: selektia, the selection of Jews. General Dan Shomron, later Israel's highest-ranking officer, commanded the paratroop and infantry forces.
I thought to myself, here is the selection again. But now there is the Israel Defense Force with its long-reaching arm and top soldiers. Can we sit quietly on the sideline? It seems simply impossible.
France, its own civilians now safe, assumes a low profile. The United Nations, long dominated by third world countries hostile to Israel, stands mute. Israeli leaders know they can rely only on themselves.
The tension here in Israel intensifies as the possibility grows that they will carry out part of their ultimatum, meaning that they will start executing the hostages one at a time.
With the deadline for executions just hours away, and a military solution not yet viable, a solemn Israeli government votes unanimously to negotiate with the terrorists. After 3 decades of military victories, Israel is forced to capitulate to her enemies.
One day we thought that they are going to start killing people, and the other way they said there is a negotiation and maybe there will be some solution. You could cry of despair and then be happy and joy and laughing because somebody said a nice joke and we were hoping for the best.
The hijackers extend their deadline to Sunday, 8 a.m., just 3 days away. In Jerusalem, hundreds of worshippers pray for the hostages' safe return and hope that their government has made the right decision. Defense Minister Shimon Peres believes that complying with the terrorists' demands is logistically impossible, leaving a military operation as the only viable option.
The minute it became clear that they are asking the release of prisoners from Kenya, from Germany, from France, from Israel, I immediately reached the conclusion that this will never happen, for different reasons, in the given time. Forget about it. We don't have such an option.
Peres assembled the chief of staff, the chief operational officer, Kuti Adam, and asked, what can we do? They told him that they didn't have an operational plan yet, so he said, well, present to me the plans you don't have yet.
Peres is presented with a bold plan. 4 C-130 Hercules transports will fly 2,500 miles over hostile territory to Entebbe. The first plane will swoop down with a storming force of commandos to surprise and overpower the terrorists. The 3 remaining planes will then recover the hostages.
The essence of the whole issue is to create surprise at the point of the first meeting, to create surprise, to kill the terrorists and to take over the situation.
General Benny Peled, then commander of the Israeli Air Force, was confident of success.
We have the capability of airlifting 1,200 soldiers and equipment to Entebbe if security can be kept within 24 hours. Simple.
When Benny Peled asked me in a very straight face, he said, what do you want? That we shall conquer Entebbe or the whole country? And I asked him, how much do you need for one? For another, he says, to conquer the whole country, I need 1,000 soldiers. To conquer Entebbe, he says, maybe 200-300. And they liked his daring.
While the Israeli Defense Force, or IDF, rehearses for the assault on the old terminal, government officials are trying to convince the terrorists that they need more time to meet their demands. If the Israelis can convince the terrorists that they are negotiating in earnest, they may catch them off guard. The success of the mission hinges on achieving total surprise.
There was an interesting moment where Peres asked everyone around the table, what are the chances the operation will succeed, how many casualties they guesstimate, and whether they are for it or not. There were various opinions. Some thought it was James Bond, others were for it.
Colonel Matan Vilnai was chief of the paratrooper brigade and deputy commander of the rescue operation.
It was a moment of truth, you know. You have to say if you believe in it or not. And all of us said that we can do it.
But even the most optimistic advocates for the mission knew that failure could be disastrous.
At the moment that the terrorists understand that we are there, their immediate reaction would be to kill as many hostages as they can. If they are crowded in one room and somebody throws a few hand grenades and open automatic fire, for my planning, 100% of casualties.
A code name is selected for the mission, Operation Thunderbolt. As Israelis celebrate the Sabbath, the military moves into high gear. pilots with experience flying over Africa are summoned to a secret base. They prepare for the possibility that Entebbe Airport may be blacked out. C-130s have never been landed on a darkened runway, and no one knows if it can be done. Using early night vision prototypes, the Air Force conducts a test run on a landing strip in the Sinai Desert.
Well, I was sure that we can land at pitch dark. I invited the Chief of Staff to fly with us, and at 200 feet, for safety reasons, the drill was to open up landing lights. When they opened up the landing lights, everybody saw, at least I saw and the pilots saw, that we were off center of the runway about maybe 200 feet. For the exercise, it was not a success.
The 7-hour flight to Uganda will tax the range of the C-130s, and they will have to refuel to make it back to Israel. The question is, where? Refueling at Entebbe would be time-consuming and risky. The only nation in the region friendly to Israel is Kenya, and Ehud Barak is dispatched there to request their assistance. 30-year-old Lieutenant Colonel Yoni Netanyahu is chosen to lead the mission. A Harvard philosophy graduate, Yoni's men call him by an old Hebrew phrase that translates as the man of the sword and the Bible. Severely wounded in Israel's six-day war with Egypt, he was left with painful nerve damage in his left arm. Although still officially 30% disabled, he talked his way back into the commandos, and 2 months before Thunderbolt, was promoted to command an anti-terrorism unit. Yoni's unit conducts a dress rehearsal of the rescue, using a hastily built full-scale mock-up of the Entebbe terminal. Commandos memorize identikits of the terrorists so they can instantly distinguish friend from foe. The plan is to have the first wave of attackers wear Ugandan uniforms and trick the airport guards into letting them pass. In Uganda, high-ranking officials use black Mercedes limousines. A plan is hatched to place the assault team in a black Mercedes, to fool the guards into thinking that a commander is approaching. If all goes according to plan, Israeli commandos will be greeted by salutes, not bullets. Paratrooper Tsurin Hershko was about to re-enter civilian life when he learned that his unit would take part in the rescue mission.
I had already finished my military service. It was one day after my service. I was supposed to go home, but I was told there's an operation, and 21 is a young age with a sense of adventure. I was looking for action, and the hijacking of the plane was in our consciousness, so I preferred to stay. I thought it could be something interesting.
Led by Chief of Operations Major General Yakutiel Kuti Adam, every aspect of the mission is meticulously planned. Nothing is left to chance.
Ehud Barak, Dan Shomron, Yoni Netanyahu, and other officers came to my office around 10 p.m. and I conducted the planning, and I went according to a checklist. And I was determined to do it according to a checklist, because if you rush, you cut the corners and it could bring you to a disaster.
Friday evening, we have the only rehearsal. It was a very bad one. And in order to have a good operation, you need to have a very bad rehearsal before it. It's according to my experience.
Absolute secrecy is vital, and not a single non-Israeli knows of the rescue mission. After the Friday rehearsal, airmen are at first ordered into quarantine, but then allowed to go home when they insist on spending what may be their last night in their own beds. The clock is ticking. The terrorists' final deadline expires at 8 a.m. Sunday. less than 20 hours away. A British Airways flight is scheduled to refuel at Entebbe shortly before midnight Saturday. If the first C-130 lands immediately after the British flight, their radar signal may not be noticed and the runway lights should still be lit. For the tightly scheduled plan to work, the commandos must lift off from Israel by 3 o'clock Saturday afternoon. With this new deadline just minutes away, the Israeli cabinet has still not approved the mission. A failed operation will cost many lives, encourage future terrorism, and further isolate the country. The crisis is a test of democracy under siege, and Prime Minister Rabin insists on the unanimous approval of his cabinet.
At 15 to 3, the government is still debating. I called Rabin's military coordinator and I told him to tell Rabin that if we don't take off by 3:30, they are in essence deciding against the operation. I suggest that we take off. Our point of no return is after some 4 hours of flying. The government can continue to debate, and when they reach a decision, if it's negative, we'll return.
2 Boeing 707s, one a hospital ship, the other an airborne command center, will accompany the 4 C-130 Hercules transports. With the government still undecided, the aerial armada lifts off for Africa at 3 p.m. Rabin insists that military intelligence confirm the hostages' location and verify the defenses in place at Entebbe. Photos from reconnaissance jets and images relayed from U.S. surveillance satellites lack these critical details.
Rabin, in fact, said, unless we know from the intelligence that when we are coming with the Hercules, the hostages are still there, and that the vehicles can cross from the new terminal to the old terminal, I will not approve it.
A Mossad agent rents a small plane in Nairobi and flies to Entebbe, where he fakes a malfunction. While circling at low altitude in apparent distress, he snaps photographs. These pictures reach the assault team with moments to spare. Half an hour after the rescue planes depart, the cabinet winds up its marathon discussion. Rabin directs Perez to flash a message to the anxiously waiting pilots. Zanek, meaning jump or scramble. Operation Thunderbolt is a go. In the crowded, sweltering terminal, 103 Jewish hostages are without water. Dozens have fallen sick from eating rancid meat and lie in bed vomiting. Throughout the crisis, 73-year-old Dora Bloch cheerfully raised the spirits of her fellow hostages. But when she falls seriously ill, she is whisked away, and her son fears for her.
Kampala Hospital, where she was, is 30 kilometers away from Entebbe Airport. I said I wanted to go with her, but luckily for me, the German women shouted a big no, and she went by herself.
None of the hostages know that 300 brave men are hurtling toward them in an airborne armada. Each Hercules crew must maintain radio silence as they navigate the 2,500 miles to Entebbe. Avoiding hostile nations, the C-130s cut across Ethiopia and Kenya en route to Uganda.
It's 7-hour flights, exactly. My longest flight till then. I never flew so many hours. And to see the jungle all the time. And you prefer not to think if something will happen and you will find yourself in the middle of this jungle, in the middle of really nowhere. You prefer not to think about it.
The assault is planned for midnight. Although only 10 terrorists guard the hostages, 100 Ugandan troops are known to be nearby. When the Mossad learns that some of them are sleeping in the same building as the hostages, they conclude that the old terminal building has not been booby-trapped with explosives. In the lead Hercules, Yoni Netanyahu and his team of commandos pile into the black Mercedes and 2 Land Rovers. They are cramped and nervous, but ready to go. Suddenly, airport lights appear. As the Israelis had hoped, the Entebbe runway is fully lit. Either the lights have been left on from the last British Airways flight, or the terrorists have been warned and are waiting in ambush. The lead Hercules drops from the sky and taxis toward the old terminal. Tension is high inside the plane. Every detail of the next few minutes will be forever etched in the mind of Yoni Netanyahu's second-in-command, Lieutenant Colonel Mookie Betzer.
The Mercedes rolls out, after it the 2 Land Rovers, and we turn the lights on. We identify the old terminal easily and drive toward it at about 40 kilometers per hour in convoy. I'm in the Mercedes along with 10 fighters plus the driver. I'm on the left side, Yoni's on the right side. About 100 meters from the terminal, we see 2 Ugandan soldiers. We expected many more. I tell Yoni, you have 2 Ugandan soldiers on the right. At this point, I tell the soldiers to cock their weapons.
As the Ugandans salute, black pistols fitted with silencers fire a burst, and the guards collapse.
The Ugandan soldier falls to the ground and we pass by him, but he's not dead. He rises. The commander of the force in the Land Rover behind us gives an order, and a soldier shoots a burst with a Kalashnikov without a silencer and kills the Ugandan. But this burst breaks the surprise element. We're about 50 meters from the entrance.
As the second C-130 hits the runway, the airport is plunged into darkness. The commando force reaches the old terminal and jumps into action. Gunfire fills the night air. Diary entries by hostage Sarah Davidson record moments frozen in time.
Suddenly, we hear a shot, followed by a burst. A Ugandan soldier probably fired a burst. We put the cards down and exchange looks. The terrorists reach for their weapons. They seem confused. In a split moment, we dive to the ground and crawl toward the bathrooms.
Hostages fear that the long-dreaded executions have begun.
Amir enters first, Amnon, a team commander, follows, and then me. Amir shoots first at the terrorist on the right, who understands what's happening and opens fire, killing one of the hostages and wounding 2 more before we hit him. At the entrance, Amnon identifies the German man and woman a meter away and kills him.
The shooting subsides. Someone shouts, "Israeli soldiers!" Are we saved? We lift our heads slowly with disbelief, and we see the most magnificent sight of our lives. Like a dream. A short soldier, his face darkened, in battle fatigues, wearing a white hat and holding a large machine gun. He looks at us calmly and says, "Folks, are you all right? Come on, we came to take you home."
Everybody was shouting, it was a kind of surrealist scene. Everybody was shouting, "Miracle, miracle, Nes, Nes."
In just 1 minute and 45 seconds, the assault team has secured the lounge area. 7 terrorists have been killed, but 3, including the mastermind, Wadia Haddad, have disappeared. Outside, Ugandan forces prove no match for the elite Israeli commandos. Ugandan guards fire bursts from the control tower, and Yoni's unit advances on them. Suddenly, Yoni collapses, hit by a sniper.
I report to Yoni that the mission was carried out, but before he answers, Amir comes on the communication line and shouts, "Mookie, Yoni's hit, Yoni's hit."
Still under attack from the tower, the soldiers form a protective corridor for the hostages. Heads of families ensure that all are accounted for. Russian-built MiG jets are blown to bits as the first C-130 begins the time-consuming refueling process. The planes must refuel and leave before Ugandan reinforcements reach the airport. Then word is received from the Airborne Command Center flying above that the C-130s can leave immediately. Kenya has finally granted permission for the Armada to refuel in Nairobi. Exactly 53 minutes after landing, the first C-130 Hercules lifts off. Aboard is the lifeless body of Yoni Netanyahu.
It was a tragic moment for me. Yoni was my deputy for a long time. He was one of my closest friends at the time. We lived together. He lived with his girlfriend, just a floor under us. It was a sheet that was put on him, and look, he was so a little bit gray and already calming, but very beautiful. He was a beautiful young man, and like sleeping, but with a kind of gray tone on the face that signals lack of life. And I just put my hand on his forehead and say, goodbye, friend.
After a 50-minute flight from Entebbe, the first C-130 lands in Nairobi for refueling. It carries the 10 most seriously injured hostages and one soldier, Turin Hershko. A Ugandan bullet penetrated his spinal cord, and he is unable to move or speak. Incredibly, just 3 hostages were killed in the rescue. Among the assault force, there is but one fatality: Yoni Netanyahu. 2 hours before dawn, the last Israeli plane lifts off from Nairobi. The only evidence of their visit is bloodstains on the tarmac. At 3 a.m., the BBC transmits reports of the rescue to a stunned world. Every person in Israel will always remember where they were when they heard the news. Future Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had no doubt that his older brother Yoni helped lead the mission.
I learned that Israel had acted in Entebbe, and at that point I picked up the phone. I called my younger brother Ido and I said, I had only one question, and these are the words that I said. I said, "Hi, is Yoni back?"
Joyous Israelis take to the streets, waving wildly to the planes passing overhead. A tumultuous crowd gathers at Lod Airport to welcome home the returning heroes. At 11 a.m., the first C-130 touches down. It's been 6 days and 22 hours since the hijacking ordeal began. The passengers of Flight 139 are finally safely home, and all of Israel rejoices. Anxious relatives and friends rush out to meet the hostages and their liberators. The elation of the hostages is tempered by the expression of the men who had saved their lives.
We asked the soldiers, "Why do you look sad?" We told them, "You've done one of the most heroic deeds in military history, which will probably be studied in military academies for many, many years." And they said, "Yes, but our leader was killed."
United in joy and sorrow, Israelis joined hands to mourn the loss of Yoni Netanyahu. In his honor, the mission would later be renamed Mivitza Yehonatan, Operation Jonathan.
I had lost a beloved brother. This was a great shock and undoubtedly affected my life in fundamental ways.
Others were also touched by tragedy. Ilan Hartouv would never see his mother, Dora Bloch, again. He believes that Idi Amin ordered her murder shortly after the rescue.
A few days later, it was already clear that she was killed. I knew you would want, most probably would want revenge. Here we have an animal who killed 300,000 Ugandans.
Idi Amin was forced from power in 1979 and fled to Saudi Arabia, where he still lives in exile. The architect of the hijacking, Dr. Wadia Haddad, was never captured. He died of cancer in 1978. The hijacking changed Tsuren Hershko's life forever. As a result of the wound he suffered at Entebbe, he is a quadriplegic, but he's never regretted his decision to take part in the rescue mission.
I'm not objective, but nevertheless, I think that it was one of the most daring, surprising, unexpected operations, and the impression that it had on people's consciousness had a very long-term effect. I tend to credit the operation with having an extremely significant effect on the fight against international terrorism. Till '76, no country had an anti-terrorism squad or special unit. No one tackled this area. Today, there isn't one state in the world that doesn't have one.
There is no denying the impact that Operation Thunderbolt had on the world.
It's a benchmark in fighting terrorism. I mean, it changed the whole idea. Terrorism is made of two things. One is the terror itself, and the other is the fear of terror, which made even more terrorizing than terror. Here we took away part of the fear.
You cannot concede to terror. The whole idea of terror is to subjugate human will to fear, to terror. And that the only way to fight it is to refuse to be afraid and to refuse to surrender.
The success of Operation Thunderbolt was due in large part to the contributions of some very courageous and brilliant leaders.
Among the officers, Kuti Adam, he was the best combination between a daring position and a cool head. He really was all the time in full control of the situation. I believe that without him, we wouldn't be able to make it.
It was touch and go operation, and this is the reason why I highly admire the courage and the ability of Rabin to take the responsibility. It was clear that for many reasons he will bear the extra responsibility, even beyond Shimon Peres, and of course beyond the chief of staff and all of us officers who were involved. And he made the decision to do it.
I think it was hard for him to take the decision, but once he took it, he was very daring and very decisive.
In the following years, Rabin would pursue peace with the same decisiveness. Israel's refusal to surrender to terrorism has gradually convinced its staunchest enemies to try a different approach. There is hope that the long conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis may soon be over.
I don't think the Israeli people in general have been full of hatred for Palestinians. They became very anti-Palestinian because of the terrorism. And each terror attack increased that distance that we had between us and the Palestinians. Once we reach a situation where terrorism is put aside and a political agreement it becomes the aim, then we change.
A few hundred brave soldiers helped change history. But even more important to them, they saved the lives of over 100 men, women, and children. Janet Almog and her fellow hostages will be forever grateful to their saviors.
So wonderful to be home. I really did not expect to get home all in one piece.
I don't think there are any words in the world to describe what your feelings are at that point, of realizing that you got a second lease on life, literally. And the thousands of people that met us at the airport and the relief It's just incredible relief. You don't realize how much emotion you've stored up, and we just cried and sort of let it all out then.
I don't take anything for granted, anything. Every day is a joy.
While the world stood mute and paralyzed, one tiny nation had defeated the forces of evil. The day was July 4th, 1976. In the United States, Americans celebrated 200 years of liberty. Half a world away, the passengers of Flight 139 celebrated their own emancipation. Freedom had won the day.